something go right over the top of us that looked like a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast. We just had something go right over the top of us that looked like a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast.
Right, so we come on to the next section, which is fossil images. There is quite a large school of thought which thinks that the NASA archive does contain fossil images, and people who look at these often say, well, this is proof that there was once life on Mars. In the hypothesis, we're agreeing with the first observation that yes, there are fossils in NASA's archive.
In these images, yeah.
But this could equally mean that they've accidentally been photographed on Earth. Now, one person who's looked at this sort of evidence extensively is a guy called Charles Schultz. And he, in his book, A Fossil Hunter's Guide to Mars, makes the assertion that Mars was once full of life because it's full of fossils. And we can show some of the examples on the screen. Let me just read a few quotes from A Fossil Hunter's Guide to Mars. Charles Schultz says, "What I present here is evidence of fossilized sea life on Mars. In the course of describing these fossils, I may refer to them as sea urchins, shark's teeth, or other terrestrial forms. However, they are not. These are only structurally identical to those organisms and are not in any way related to them. It is very likely that these creatures have absolutely no genetic relationship to the creatures we have on Earth. They are simply shaped by their environment to function in the same manner as marine creatures on the Earth."
Okay, so I've got quite a hard time with that statement, because he says, even though they're the same, they're not the same.
Basically, they are images of Earth-made fossils that he is trying to peddle out to the masses that they are Mars related. So this lends to the argument that these images are taken from an Earth.
But I just can't understand
source.
why you would think that it would do something in less than 40% of our gravity. No matter what the atmosphere was, the gravity isn't going to change.
No.
Significantly, anyway.
No, and the temperature variance is massively different.
Well, an atmosphere would massively change that, though.
Yeah, but it would never be as warm.
Well, once again, the gravity has a huge factor on that, doesn't it? Because the air pressure would be much lower. Because even the same, it just wouldn't get pulled down as tough.
No.
So
Could be larger.
a shark's tooth wouldn't be the shape of a shark's tooth. It just wouldn't be that shape.
It's a fair point.
You know, I mean,
it's not beyond the realms of possibility.
also, it's just the whole way a marine animal would exist would be completely different. I mean, water would be a completely different density, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would be. You're right.
I mean,
And it would be a different depth as well.
I mean,
So it would be quite shallow on Mars.
Well, I mean, and of course you've got these huge. I mean, I haven't looked extensively at how big the oceans would have been if there were any. But to me, that whole philosophy is kind of blindsided to the fact that he might not be looking at
Martian
fossils,
but in fact, Earth fossils.
because to see something that you would call a shark's tooth. And to think it would evolve in such a similar way, in such a completely different environment, it just makes no sense to me at all.
It's wild. It's wild speculation.
It is very confusing.
If I call something on Mars a sea urchin or a trilobite, be aware that the similarity is strictly morphological and is not endorsed in any manner as a scientific proof that these fossils are from sea urchins, trilobites, or any other terrestrial organisms. Their forms are the result of the fact that form and function go hand in hand. So he's saying that they've just evolved in the same way that they did on Earth,
Yes.
in parallel, if you like. But what I've said in the hypothesis is, by making this statement, Schultz is showing that he is convinced the images he is examining are from Mars. If not, isn't surely the elephant in the room that he is actually looking at Earth fossils photographed on Earth? If Schultz is correct that the fossils seem identical to Earth fossils, which is what he's asserting, is it not an equally strong hypothesis that the images are from the Earth?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
And Schultz goes on to state, and I think this is more key, the very agencies that are proclaiming their support for the search for alien life are the same organizations that are actively discrediting the discoveries that have been made. It begs the question, why?
And unfortunately, the fact that they never left the Earth would be the answer.
Exactly, it answers that question immediately, doesn't it? Yeah, this is the evidence shown so far is really quite compelling, but I just can't believe some of the comments that are coming out from some of these people.
Well, but once again, we're coming back to the whole other problem. You've got all these people at NASA monitoring all this stuff, going around Mars, going around Venus, going around Mercury and Saturn. And, I mean, what are we saying? Some of it's got to be real.
Some of it's got to be real. Otherwise, where are all these rockets going? Are they just dumping them into the sea?
But they can't be. They check everything. They check all the fuel. I mean, how could you couldn't screw the whole of that up. I mean, that's what's also difficult to believe about the Apollo 11 thing, is that somehow, mind you, I suppose you'd have control over the burn. It wouldn't matter how much fuel you had. All you've got to do is stop the burn early and feed them false data.
Yeah.
That's all you've got to do.
Yeah.
And then you just keep feeding them false data.
Yeah, and you could just dump the fuel and land it.
And every time they get a weird anomaly, and they do get quite a lot of weird anomalies that you see in the paper.
It's just scrubbed out by the private entity that scrubs all the imagery.
Or it just gets, they just say, oh, it was because of this, or it was because of that. But, I mean, it's, I find it so difficult to believe either way. You know, it can't all be just bits of sand that happen to look like a fossil. It can't be.
Yeah, it can't just be something that looks exactly like a lichen, but it's not a lichen. It's a lichen.
But also,
You know,
the problem is all the stuff that Charles Schultz has made extensive mappings of, where he uses all these words like sea urchin, trilobite.
They're all earthbound creatures.
Sharks. He's using all these words to describe something that looks exactly the same but isn't. Well, that can't all just be wind and sand.
Yeah, it's not
So what are the possibilities? Number one, Mars has got fossils all over it, so it used to be just like Earth, which would explain Cydonia. Okay, so that wraps those two up together, which would also, if NASA want to deny Cydonia, then they'd have to deny the fossils. So that is possible. Charles Schultz's theory isn't impossible. It is possible that this stuff's coming from Mars, and they just don't want to admit it. The problem is when you get to stuff like the whalebone. The whalebone
vertebrae.
isn't a fossil.
Yeah.
It's sticking out of the ground.
Yeah.
That is not a fossil. That has to be a whalebone.
Yeah.
Which means it's only been there for maximum, I don't know,
1,000
years, say?
Maximum 1,000 years.
Yeah, I mean, so that means that whatever's happened to Mars has happened like in the Middle Ages, which seems pretty extreme.
Unlikely. Yeah,
You know,
very unlikely. Yeah.
I mean,
It's just the waters just keep getting muddier and muddier, you know, and the responses from the scientists on these queries is designed by its nature to make the waters muddier.
but
The
also,
wording,
I'm
everything.
interested to it's quite interested to understand why. You know, they never really go into who these. You know, you would have thought the first thing they do is say, "This is the first scientist. He's bloody blah. He's this is who his bloody blah was. He went to this university." Where is all that information? Or did the scientist say, "I want to remain anonymous"? Why would you want to say that?
Yeah, well,
I mean,
because you're not a scientist at all. You're just there to put propaganda out.
well, that seems weird.
Yeah, it's all weird.
It just, there just doesn't seem to be
Any consistency in anything.
Well, I can't believe that there's no... The satellites around Mars have got to be real because they send back all the pictures of the ground data.
Yeah. You'd think so. Like you said earlier, there has to be an element of this is real. Some of these experiments that NASA are putting out there are real. Obviously, we see the space station go above our heads daily. We've seen all the launches of the rockets. But once they leave the Earth's biosphere, it's anyone's guess because we're only fed what they give us.
But
it's the washing machine
that you telling? Yeah,
it's the washing machine thing that you
right.
mentioned in the last episode.
But the problem is, could they really make up a whole fake Mars to feed NASA? I mean, is that really? Or have they been there since the 1950s with stuff that's way faster than rockets? And they're just sending them back data they've had for decades.
They're just they're just drip feeding us little elements of truth and scandal. We'd like to know what you guys think. Please leave a comment because it means a lot to us to get some feedback.
So anybody
on this.
You can put
some sense in this. Yeah,
throw a dart somewhere in between the haves and have-nots in all this, because it is utterly confusing. It can't all be fake, and yet it can't all be real. So where are we?
Yeah.
Let's carry on.
And I've provided a possible answer to that.
Yes.
A plausible answer to that question is that the discoveries are not genuine because they're from the Earth.
Yes.
That would be a reason for not wanting to admit them.
Yes.
Now then, let's go through.
And the oddity is with this whole scenario is that discovering like microbial life and little fossilized organisms on Mars seems to me like a fairly tame discovery, that they should be able to announce if indeed, that was what they had actually discovered. In other words, what I'm saying is I find it extremely odd that NASA would not announce the discovery of microbial life, or rather, perhaps I should correct myself, because they did announce the discovery of microbial life in 1976, but then about a year or so later, they said that the experiment was flawed and the result was wrong. So why are they being so cagey?
A year later.
I mean, for goodness sake.
A year later.
Is that really true, that they announced microbial life in 1976 and then a year later they changed their mind? I mean, I suppose that's possible.
How would you know that the experiment was contaminated?
It sounds almost like...
Did someone's hair float into the experiment and drop in there?
It sounds almost like something the government would do. But then again, of course, NASA is a sort of...
It's a government arm.
Slightly governmental operation. I mean... it's almost like, can you imagine if they'd said coronavirus in 2019 and then said, oh no, in 2020, sorry, it's just the flu.
Yeah, it's just. It's just a standard influenza. Yeah.
I mean, could you really do that?
Yeah, you can get away with anything.
Because that's how serious it is. I mean, you're talking about, just like he says in that film Life, the first incontrovertible proof of alien life. They announced it for a whole year and then said, oh no, wait a minute.
We got it wrong.
It must
How
have been
embarrassing is that?
It must have been a bit of shampoo or something.
Yeah.
I mean, what?
That just puts shade on all your scientists and all the work you've done. If you cannot actually confirm your own experiments are real and accurate, and the money you've spent on those experiments, and it takes you a year to turn around to the public and go,
But also, who believes in NASA that you can retract something like that a year later? I mean, do they just... I mean, that to me, it almost feels like they're just testing to see whether anyone really gives a stuff.
Mm.
I mean, and I think that's one of the really interesting things about all of this, is that, the people who really care about stuff like ISS and stuff like that are about 1 in 20, I would say. You know, people who are really, you know, the stargazer types.
Yeah.
You know, a very small percentage of us. Everybody else just takes it for granted, and that's what's really important.
The Cardassian lot, you know.
But it's the washing
the
machine.
reality TV crew.
It's the washing machine thing.
Yeah.
It's like 1 in 20 of us actually thinks about where all that wastewater actually goes, and the other 19 of us just have to get on with the washing.
Yeah.
I mean, so if you said to that if you suddenly said, "Oh, it turns out we've polluted the rivers a lot more than we thought we had," it would only be that 1 in 20 that even noticed.
And
everyone else
even cared.
And everyone else would just keep washing their clothes.
Yeah.
Because they've got no... It's like Truman Show. Like, when he discovers he's in a fake world, all she keeps doing is trying to keep advertising the product.
Yeah.
Because that's all she knows.
Yeah,
that's all she knows what to do.
That's their function.
So,
yeah.
Even if we realised that we'd killed 99% of everything in every river in Britain, there's no way you could stop a housewife or a house husband or a house...
Getting the dads back out and carrying on, because even if they were aware of it, they'll be they'll justify it and say, well, it's too late now, might as well carry on.
But what are my kids going to wear to school? They're going to have a clean shirt.
Yeah, life carries on.
You know, your average mother will run over 6 or 7 people just to get their kids to a ballet lesson.
And I think that is what NASA depend on. That most of the world really doesn't care, so we can do what we want. We can say what we want. We can amaze people, and then we can let them down. At the end of the day, only a small percentage of people actually give us stuff. The rest will just carry on as normal. And that allows them to do what they want. The system doesn't let them care.
I mean, if we lived in northern Queensland, we could go and live in a tent and shit in a hole and wear the same pair of shorts for the rest of the year. And it wouldn't matter. Did I just say shit in a hole? Oh, sorry. Use dig a toilet and move every couple of weeks to get away from until the feces sank into the earth. And be perfectly self-sufficient. In Britain, you can't do that. If you went to live outside in a tent, you'd be dead in 4 days. You know, I mean...
Yeah. Yeah, they are very aware of the world that they are presenting to. They have, obviously, social science experts that will tell them, you know, if you give them this information that you found life on Mars, yeah, this small percentage would care, but, and you've got to remember the time was different as well. Only a few people had television sets, only a few people had access to papers. Obviously, nowhere near the amount of people that now have access to a litany of information.
Everyone had a telly in 76.
Yeah, well, we're talking about the world, generally.
Well,
in 76, not everyone had a telly.
But
sorry,
everyone in America had a telly.
Yeah, that's who they were really playing towards.
Well, that's who they've got to do. That's who pays for them.
That's who pays for them, exactly. But at the same time, the proportion of people that were looking at those televisions, a small percentage of them were interested in science. You know, the Cold War was still going on. There were loads of different distractions.
Vietnam was still going on, really.
Yeah,
in
Vietnam,
some ways.
Yeah. So, yeah, there were many other distractions that were more pressing to the populace than if they found microbial life or not. And then to have that information out in the ether for a year under the pretense that they had, and then to turn around and 180 to, oh, we made a mistake.
Well, they didn't say. They just said that it was unreliable.
That's fine. That's still a mistake. You don't make the call unless you make the call.
Well, I hear what you're saying, but what they're saying is, they're not saying there isn't life. They're just making it. We don't know.
Yeah.
In other words,
they're muddying the waters.
We know no more now than if we hadn't gone.
Yeah. And back to the old adage: never a straight answer. Anyway, let's see what else he's got to say.
About the discovery of even microbial life. You know, you'd think that wouldn't be a threat to anybody to say that they discovered it.
And even fossils.
Yeah.
So what? There's some fossils on Mars. There might be life.
Yeah.
Is that such a big thing to sort of want to cover up?
Right. Because fossils doesn't equal aliens. You know, it's so.
And at the very least, what they could do is all of the things that Charles Schultz has found in these images. They could hold a conference and debate it on platforms and point out all of these anomalies in the open,
Yes,
and then
indeed.
come to some conclusions.
Yes.
But they haven't done all of
They
that.
haven't done that. In fact, Charles Schultz has said in interviews that he was invited to conferences and then they cancelled him, or they cancelled the conference.
So the image here on the screen there, many experts agree, is a crinoid fossil. And incidentally, the two scientists that looked at the document both said it looked like biology. Right?
Yes.
They could not debunk this image. Right?
Yes.
Okay, we move on to some of Charles Schultz's images.
Yeah.
So the first one here is, this is a quote from A Fossil Hunter's Guide to Mars. Marine fossils from Sol 009, microscopic imager on opportunity. From top left is a spiral shell, broken shell showing chambers and a scallop. From bottom left are what appears to be a shark's tooth. That's a type of shell, or, well, what is a shark's tooth? It's a remnant of biology, isn't
Yes.
it?
Yeah.
It's not literally a shark's tooth. It's just shaped like a shark's tooth, but it's a remnant of biology. Spiral shell, similar to a conch. These were found in Eagle Crater. But as you say, Andrew, wouldn't it be great if we had colour images and more high definition images? of
Absolutely,
these?
because then we'd have more data to work with. So, again, there's a question mark as to why they haven't why we haven't been able to have colour images of these things.
The image on the right there, Schultz is claiming is like a sea gopher, and he's pointing out various aspects of it in that diagram. The next one is another crinoid fossil. So he's just marked out the shape there in the right-hand image. Crinoid is not a plant; it's an animal or a sea creature which swims about the sea, and you can see it there imprinted on this rock. Crinoid fossil. And further image here, this is a whelk shell, according to Charles Schultz, and he's got a close-up there. These are just a selection of images I've taken from A Fossil Hunter's Guide to Mars.
Yes.
Some of the ones that I found more convincing. Let me just read this. Spirit seems to be in an area that had numerous species that are very similar to terrestrial marine organisms, both past and present. There are many seashells, some apparent urchins, crinoids, stromatolites, and what may be bones of larger animals such as reptiles, although that is speculative at this time. Altogether, it creates an image of a Mars that supported a large population of diverse organisms, but in all they appear to be aquatic and not land-dwelling. This would be consistent with the thin atmosphere and poor shielding from the radiation environment. More in-depth exploration will be needed on the planet to determine what part, if any, that land organisms played in this lost ecosystem. Now, again, another possible explanation is that it's in some previous marine area on the Earth, perhaps one of the areas where rover testing has been done.
And again, if you take the kind of logic that NASA wants to be self-sustaining in that it needs to attract funding for its future projects, then revealing these fossils that Charles Schultz had discovered would make a lot of sense, because that paragraph that you were reading there then kind of logically leads you on to, well, we need to have a different type of mission to specifically explore this region where the fossils are found, with new experiments on board, different approach to how we would sample the soil, or, dig deeper or dig more, or, maybe even a sample and return mission, which has been mentioned on a couple of videos. So that presents NASA with an ideal opportunity to actually get more projects on the books and get more funding, doesn't it? So why, for their logic, why would they want to just ignore those findings?
Yeah, their mission is not to land the thing on the Martian surface when they all jump up and down and pat each other on the back. That's not the end of the mission. The mission is to look for life.
Yes.
But it seems that they're not interested in finding life.
That's what it seems like to me.
Right, now I'm going to show some unexplained or some bizarre anomalies now in some of the images. Now, whenever you get anomalies on Mars, it's explained away as event effect, which you find these on Earth. We've just seen some images there. This is where you get strong winds and sand is blown up and blows over the surface of rock, and it makes the surface smooth, and you get very rounded edges or circular holes and this kind of thing. And yes, I'm inclined to believe that some of the anomalies are ventifacts.
Yes.
Now, that doesn't mean they're ventifacts on Mars, though. It could mean it's an Earth ventifact.
Right.
So this image here, we see that the object in the middle there, which looks like it has sort of very regular concentric, sort of donut-shaped profile on it. I'll just give a close-up there. And we see another ventifact below, where you can see the wind has possibly eroded this piece of rock. Now, the landscape we see there in the next image also shows the same ventifact, and there's another close-up of it. These images, we also featured, Gary McKinnon was talking about these images, but the next one, which is a close-up of image section A, is that a ventifact? Looks a bit peculiar.
What the heck is that? That is not biological. That's artificiality.
Looks like a handle on the top of that.
It looks too smooth. Look at it, it's
Yeah.
completely regular. It almost looks
They're all
like
angles.
a gas pipe or something
Yeah.
sticking up out of the ground.
Maybe some similarities to a bell. There's many different shapes that come to mind.
No,
when
but I
you
mean,
look at
this is the pipe running along the ground.
it. Yeah.
You know, sticking up out of the ground here.
That part
And
was-
this is the some sort of vent.
Yeah.
That's got maybe got damaged or something, but has got some sort of handle where you can. I mean, that is not.
You'd think that's an Earth picture, wouldn't you? Look at the variation of colour in those stones. That is just unbelievable, just surrounding it.
It's really odd.
Where's all this colour come from? Why isn't everything red? You know, this is my problem. Every image we're fed is completely different. There's such a kaleidoscope of colours and so forth.
But you would
That-
expect that on a planet, though. But I mean, what doesn't make any sense is why some parts of it would be that red. This is far more believable. But that in the middle, to me,
It looks like a pipe, yeah.
it doesn't
Going.
seem to be. It seems to be something that everything else has been disturbed to be put there,
Yeah.
because everything else looks the same. I mean, it almost looks like you know, ancient jewellery sort of thrown everywhere.
Yeah, it's very odd. Interesting photo.
But the definition's so low, it's really hard to work it out.
Did you read anything into that image, Andrew, the top one here?
Well, I looked at some of these and it didn't really stand out to me as anything really obvious. But, you know, I will just add that there are a number of surface anomalies which seem to show structure which doesn't appear to be geology, it's something else, you know. And Richard Hoagland has some of these on his site too, where it looks like we've got bits of machinery or something, or bits of you know, devices laying on the ground. And they are very interesting when you look at them. And even those images on Hoagland's site were from Pathfinder mission.
Right.
So yeah, there are a lot of and that's a hexagonal image you're showing there. So
So this is from Charles Schultz pointed this out from Fossil Hunter's Guide to the Mars. I'll just give the caption. He says 3 mysteries in one shot. The top object has 5 concave sides in a perfect pentagon, and the centre has a round hole dead centre. Object is hollow and its walls wafer thin. The left pentagon object shows perfect linear edges precisely at the angles of a perfect pentagon. The bottom right object is shaped like a rind and is one of about 2 dozen that I have found. So he's saying that he thinks that this is biology with the pentagon shape, which occurs in biology.
yeah.
Now here's another very peculiar image. The red square there, if we just zoom in on that, answers on a postcard what this is in this image. What do you think of that one, Andrew? It's a dumbbell shape.
Yeah, I mean it's fairly indistinct. So
You don't think it's something regular which has been machined or anything like that?
difficult to say. I think I would say that's difficult to say
Right.
myself.
All right.
But
Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Now, I think this was
Yeah, this
featured
was
in
very
mainstream media, this particular
Yeah,
one.
it was.
wasn't
It was in the, I'm pretty sure it was in the Daily Mail. Yeah.
And it is a genuine Mars rover image.
Yep.
It's from the Opportunity rover, and there's a close-up. And do you think that can be passed off as geology?
Well, that's really tough. I mean, I suppose one could argue that it's a larger rock, and the sun is at a certain angle.
There's a dome. That is a dome, isn't it?
Well, I mean, to me, just
Nature
looking at this
doesn't
bit
make
here,
things like that, does it?
that's one of those things they sit in for 3 months when they're on their university PhD course. There's another one in the background, and there's a bloke sitting down having a fag. I mean,
if it's not filmed on Earth, it's life. It's either or. They're both. You know, very, very important facts that we need to get
so
some
either
straight answers on.
Zubrin is further ahead than he's letting on, or because that looks almost exactly like what he was talking about.
There's your dome, yeah. There's your dome.
And that looks like to me, I mean, okay, it's pretty indistinct, but it's so white compared to everything else. It just looks like an astronaut suit.
Mm.
You know, there's nothing else that intensely white for that far.
I can't get over that dome. It's so uncanny.
And so forth. But yeah, it does look like a
Now,
dome.
I've put an arrow on the right hand of the screen here just to point out that it appears to be a smaller dome.
Yes. Yeah.
And the question I'm asking in the hypothesis is, could we be looking at one of these, which is the sort of accommodation units that they install in the desert or in the Canadian Arctic or wherever they're doing their rover testing to house equipment or even to live in.
Yes.
And they always have a domed top, as we can see there. Now, I'm not saying it's exactly like those. They might be different types of accommodation hub.
Yeah.
Right? Is it an accommodation hub of the Mars rover testing team?
Yeah.
Or is it a protection for some sort of satellite dish?
Yeah. I mean, you could make a number of sort of guesses as to what it might be, and I think the frustrating thing again is that we don't. If you write to somebody at NASA and ask for an explanation of what that is, you generally don't get a response, or you'll get. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm being unfair, but the explanations I've received for some of these images which show structures certainly have not been satisfactory to me, and none of them have come from NASA.
Right. The next section, which I've left in from the previous hypothesis, which I'll skip over because we've already been through it, is just this image which appears to show anomalies in the dust on the solar panels, which one of them coincidentally is the same size and shape as a thumbprint.
Yeah.
So we're saying that there's no way that once the things left the Earth that someone could come and leave their thumbprint in the dust, and the dust is clearly being created after the things left the Earth.
Yes.
So it's not possible to get a thumbprint in there.
Yes. And there's actually another image which is from either the Spirit or Opportunity mission where there appears to be a footprint. It's near where the rover landed, and you see the rover's turned back to look at where the landing package has kind of unfurled itself. And there's what looks like a footprint in the soil, or a boot print, I should say, rather than a footprint.
Right.
That is also an intriguing image.
Right. Perhaps I can add that to the hypothesis because I wasn't aware of that one. Again, we've covered the colours argument in a previous show, but just to quickly skim through it, that was the first image which came back from the Viking mission, nice blue sky and slightly reddish sort of soil. And they said, we made a mistake, it should have looked like that.
Right.
So they've used a false colour image in the second image for some bizarre reason. As I say, we've been through the colours, and the scientific reason for colouring these images is because you can examine the geology or other features using filters or colour substitution rather than using a true colour image. That's their excuse
that's
for
their basic argument.
99% of the images coming back with this red tinge to them.
Yes.
And we can see here in some of these images, people have actually corrected the colours to show you what the sky.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, we've mentioned this so many times before,
coming back with this red tinge to them.
Yes.
That is fascinating. Because we did muck about with this, didn't we?
Yeah.
Now, that one in the middle
That's
What I find really disturbing about it is the rover looks more realistic. Do you know what I mean? In the one on the left, it looks like the rover's gone a sort of funny red colour. Where that's also that's Viking. That's Viking. So that's not the lander.
that's an early photograph. Look how good the quality is compared to the stuff we're given these days.
So that's interesting. So how on earth did they send an analog picture back in
It must have taken a long time to process. Get little bits back at a time. I think it takes about 5 minutes or something to get there, or 8 minutes, something like that.
But there weren't as many satellites in orbit back in those days anyway.
No.
So it was more difficult to get signals back. We'd have to have a look into that probably. But it just looks like such a lovely day in Arizona.
Yeah.
Doesn't it? I mean...
Where's Carl Sagan's trench coat?
Exactly. Nice and early in the morning.
Yeah.
It just looks like he's down at Brighton Beach or something. And, I mean... It just the frightening part about it is when you look at the picture on the left, it stops seeming so plausible.
Yeah.
Once you've seen it like that, that makes the picture on the left look stupid.
It does. It just screams colour filters.
Anyway, let's carry on. I mean, I don't know what else to say about that. It's just, I mean, that's the Viking was one of the earliest landers, I think. So I mean, goodness knows what's going on really.
And we can see here in some of these images, people have actually corrected the colours to show you what the sky really should look like in these images. And again, in the hypothesis, I say, well, haven't they just taken a photograph on Earth and they've added a red colour on it to make it look like an alien planet?
Yes.
That to me seems like using Occam's razor.
I mean, I spoke about this several years ago, and I was really coming at it from the angle of the rovers really were on Mars, and they were covering up that it was like the Earth. So I hadn't at that point considered, again, as we were saying earlier, like some of the other researchers, I hadn't considered that they'd faked the rover missions, and the rovers were really on Earth. And again, we've still got some more stuff to go through about the engineering problems and so forth.
Now, I'd just like to point this one out, which was highlighted in A Fossil Hunter's Guide to Mars. They've not only used the wrong colours in this image, they've destroyed some of the detail, apparently. This is the caption. NASA's press release version of Burns Cliff made using infrared as a colour and destroying the contrast and image sharpness. The sky has been literally erased and painted over, then blurred into the crater edge. There is no good technical or scientific reason for this representation. The colours are so far off that it barely qualifies as a picture of Mars. And this is what the image should look like. Okay, Burns Cliff, the true colour image. So why are they doing this to their images? Again, kind of the standard conspiratorial view is, they're covering up the fact that the skies are blue on Mars, but we're suggesting in the hypothesis, no, it's just that the thing's taken on Earth. Now, we've been through the impossible weather, and there's argument over whether there's water on Mars. And people have said that at certain temperatures and pressures, you would get water or perhaps light rain or even ice and snow on Mars. So we go into it in detail in the hypothesis. So I'll skip past this part. You can look that up if you want to read it. You can download the hypothesis, incidentally, from this link. And anyone who wants to either add to it or come back with some comments to try and explain the evidence, because we're trying to build this hypothesis over a period of time into a piece of evidence. Now, this image looks at what appears to be a fake sand dune. I discussed this one with Gary McKinnon. Did you look at this one, Andrew?
I did, yes, and it does look as if it's somehow being photoshopped or something. It's quite a dark image, I thought, and I didn't actually try and lighten it up myself.
Definitely been photoshopped. Look at the straight edge on that. Look at the coloration differences and variations. Look how those rocks go into that sand, and they're more or less cut off. It's just another.
You can see there's some evidence of something there that's been kind of, they've just turned the contrast down or something. you can see the sort of little bits of rocks around sort of here. But why have they done that? It's also such an incredibly perfect shape at the top, isn't it?
It's just too picture perfect.
What
It's like a waterfall. That's what a waterfall would look like, where water is just falling over an edge and you get that straight line. But sand doesn't form like that. There's no sand dune that will be like. Look at the sand dunes surrounding it. Look at the bumpiness of how the wind has shaped it.
And the rock.
And
It
the
just
rock.
doesn't, and it doesn't make any sense because it can't be water because the water's got nowhere to go.
It's just another example of tampering that just muddies the water and makes you question why. Why would you tamper with it? If it's real, fine, leave it. It's a rocky crop of sand dune. Why tamper with it?
Something must have been there.
It just leads more questions than answers. Again, never a straight answer.
Itself, but it does look like some type of manufactured or photoshopped dune. Yeah, I'd agree. It
Right.
does look a bit weird.
The question is, why do they need to do that? Why do they need to remove a large portion of the image and replace it with a fake sand dune? Is it covering up their bunkhouse?
Yeah, that's it. Again, you wonder, like the dome image we looked at a couple of minutes ago, are they covering up something like that and airbrushing that out?